Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back to the Roman Empire. But forget the stoic senators in their white togas and the brilliant, disciplined generals you see in the movies. We're diving headfirst into the 4-year-long fever dream that was the reign of Emperor Elagabalus. Honestly, if you were a Roman noble during this time, your chances of surviving with your sanity or your dignity intact were questionable at best. You'd be asked to do some very, very strange things for a teenage emperor who was, to put it mildly, marching to the beat of a very different, very loud, and very glittery drum. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see our little community scattered across the night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story doesn't begin in Rome with its marble columns and sprawling forums. It doesn't even begin in Italy. It starts with you. And right now, you are a 14-year-old boy in the sun-baked city of Emesa, in the Roman province of Syria. Your name isn't Elagabalus, that's a nickname history will give you. And trust me, it's not meant as a compliment. For now, you are Varius Avitus Bashinus, and your world smells of frankincense, hot dust, and roasting lamb from the nearby market. Your life revolves around a single, immense, and frankly bizarre object, your god. You are the hereditary high priest of the sun god El-Gabriel, or more accurately, Al-Gabriel. And your god doesn't look like Jupiter or Apollo. There's no handsome, muscular statue with a chiseled jawline. Your god is a rock, a conical black stone, strangely smooth in some places, pitted in others, that sits on a gilded chariot in the heart of a magnificent temple. It's almost certainly a meteorite, a piece of the heavens that crashed into the Syrian desert millennia ago. For the people of Emesa, it is the most powerful object in the world. It is divinity incarnate, and you are its keeper. This isn't a job you applied for, it's a destiny you were born into. Your family has tended the stone for generations. Every day is a performance. You wake before dawn, dressed in fine silks, your eyes lined with kohl, your cheeks rouged. You wear elaborate headdresses and jewelry that links and glitters as you move. Your life is a series of ancient, hypnotic rituals. You dance before the stone. You lead the chants, you preside over the sacrifices. And you are magnificent at it. The crowds watch you mesmerized. You have a natural charisma, a theatrical flair that makes the old rites feel new and electric. At 14, you are a local superstar, a holy figure wrapped in mystique and silk. But while you're busy being a divine pop star, the adults in your family are playing a much more dangerous game. Your mother, Julia Soaemias, watches you with a mixture of pride and calculation. But the real power, the true puppet master, is your grandmother, Julia Maze. She is a woman forged in ambition and political fire. Her sister was Julia Domna, the wife of the great Emperor Septimus Severus. This means you are, by a slightly tangled branch of the family tree, related to the former imperial dynasty. This is your mainstream history point for tonight. Your connection to the Sever and dynasty was your ticket to the throne. It wasn't your own merit, at least not initially, but your bloodline that made you a contender. Maze has spent years at the heart of power in Rome, but recently, things have gone south. The Emperor Caracolla, your mother's cousin, was assassinated, and the throne was seized by his praetorian prefect, a man named Macarianus. Macarianus, seeing your grandmother as a potential threat, has exiled her and her family back here to Emesa. He thought he was sending her into political irrelevance. He was wrong. He sent her right back to her source of power, a massive family fortune in you, her handsome, exotic, damn exotic, and divinely appointed grandson. She watches you perform the rituals. She sees the devotion you inspire. And she starts to think. She looks at your youthful face, your easy charm, and she sees a much better looking and, more importantly, a much more controllable face to put on the Roman Empire than the aging soldier Macarianus. And here's our little academic rabbit hole for the evening. Historians are still debating just how early the plan was hatched. Was your grandmother a master chess player, plotting this 5 moves ahead the moment she was exiled, or was she simply a brilliant opportunist who, upon returning home and seeing your local popularity, suddenly realized the potential of the hand she had been dealt? The truth is likely somewhere in between, a slow burn of an idea that caught fire. For now, you were blissfully, or perhaps woefully, unaware of the scale of her ambition. You are consumed by your duties, by the music, the colors, the adoration. You are the center of your universe, but you don't yet realize that your universe is about to expand to swallow an entire empire. The whispers between your mother and grandmother, in the cool porticos of your family villa, are just background noise. They are talking about legions, about gold, about destiny. They are looking at you, their boy priestiny, and seeing a key that could unlock the gates of Rome itself. And they are about to put that key in the lock. Those whispers in the villa aren't just background noise for long. One evening, the incense smells a little sharper, the shadows feel a little longer. Your grandmother, Julia Maizet, sits you down. Your mother is there too, looking unusually tense. There are no silks, no rituals, just a dead serious gaze of two women who have tasted power and are starved for more. Maizet begins to speak, her voice low and steady. She talks about the current emperor, Macarianus, a man who stole the throne. A man who stole the throne, crucially, is unpopular with the soldiers. HES tried to trim their bonuses, a famously bad move for anyone who wants to, stay alive as a Roman emperor. Then she looks at you. She tells you that the soldiers miss their old leader, the one Macarianus had killed Caracolla. They loved Caracolla. He was a brute, yes, but he was their brute. He raised their pay, fought alongside them, and was the son of a great emperor. He was one of them in a way. And then, she drops the bombshell. She tells you and the entire world a new story. A story that is almost certainly a lie, but a brilliant, fantastically scandalous one. She announces that your mother, Julia Saemias, didn't just admire her cousin Caracolla from afar. They were lovers. And you, Varius Savitus Bastinus, are not the son of your late father. You are the secret, illegitimate son of the beloved, murdered Emperor Caracolla. Let that sink in for a moment. Your grandmother has just rewritten your entire identity. She has sacrificed your mother's reputation on the altar of ambition, and your mother is a willing participant. She nods along, a flicker of something pride-fear resolve in her eyes. You are no longer just a high priest from a wealthy Syrian family. You are now the last scion of the Severan dynasty, the rightful heir. A living ghost come to reclaim his father's throne. It's the kind of plot twist from a daytime soap opera. But this one is aimed at controlling the most powerful empire on earth. You, at 14, are probably just trying to keep up. One day you're dancing for a space rock, the next you're the secret love child of a murdered emperor. It's a lot to process, but there's a thrill to it. Isn't there? The stage just got a whole lot bigger. This is where your grandmother's genius and her immense fortune come into play. This is our obscure little tidbit for the night. The plan wasn't just to spread a rumor and hope for the best. It was a targeted operation. Neri Mesa was a Roman legion, the Legio II Gallica. They had been fiercely loyal to Caracolla and were stationed there by Macarianus, who didn't quite trust them. Maizet knows this. Late at night, servants you've known your whole life are no longer carrying trays of fruit and wine, but heavy chests, clinking with gold and silver, out of the family vaults. Your grandmother is about to make the soldiers of the Third Gallica an offer they can refuse. The story she spins for them is perfect. Look, she says, here is the boy, the spitting image of his father Caracolla. A total lie, by the way. Most depictions show Caracolla as a scowling, brutish man, while you were known for your fine, almost pretty features. But hey, details. She reminds them of Macrinus' pay cuts. And then she opens the chests. The argument is simple: support this boy, the true heir who will restore your pay and shower you with riches. Or stick with the cheapskate who murdered your last leader. And this leads to one of history's great debates. Did the soldiers actually believe the story, or did they just not care? A few historians argue that the tale was just plausible enough, and the family resemblance just strong enough if you squinted and had been paid enough for them to buy it. but most lean towards a more cynical, and probably more realistic view. The soldiers saw a golden opportunity. The story of you being Caracola's son was the perfect, face-saving excuse to do what they wanted to do anyway: mutiny, get rid of an unpopular boss, and get a huge payday from a wealthy family that would owe them everything. You weren't a cause they believed in, you were a convenient flag to rally under while they secured the bag. So one night, in the middle of May in the year 218, the plan is put into action. You are smuggled out of the city and into the legionary camp under the cover of darkness. The silks of the priest are gone. You're now dressed, probably awkwardly, in Roman attire. You can feel the cold metal of a borrowed breastplate, the heavy wool of a military cloak. The smell isn't incense, it's leather, sweat, and campfires. On the dawn of May 16th, your grandmother and mother present you to the assembled legion. They hoist you up on their shoulders. The sun, your god, is just beginning to rise over the Syrian hills. The soldiers, their pockets metaphorically jingling with the promise of Mace's gold, raise a cheer. They proclaim you emperor. You are no longer Varius. You take a new, imperial name, Marcus Aurelius Antonius, the same name Caracola used. The lie is now official. The sun has barely dried the morning dew on the legionary standards, and suddenly you're an emperor. Or at least an anti-emperor. A claimant. The news of your proclamation by the Third Gallica spreads like wildfire through the Roman East. The current emperor, Macaenus, is hundreds of miles away in Antioch, the provincial capital. At first he probably scoffs. Some kid in may say a ridiculous story about being Caracola's son. He sees it as a minor annoyance, a local squabble he can easily crush. This underestimation is his first, and perhaps greatest, mistake. He dispatches one of his Praetorian prefects, a man named Ulpius Julianus, with a cavalry detachment to quash the rebellion. It's supposed to be a simple police action. Ride in, arrest the crazy family, execute a few ringleaders, problem solved. But your grandmother, Julia Maze, isn't just sitting around counting her remaining gold. She's using it. Her agents are everywhere, sowing dissent, spreading the story of your divine parentage, and most importantly, reminding every soldier they meet that you represent a return to the good old days of high pay and glory. When Julian USS cavalry arrives outside the camp of the Third Gallica, something unexpected happens. The battle, if you can call it that, is a farce. Your supporters don't just fight back, they engage in psychological warfare. They lean over the ramparts and hold up bags of coins. They call out to the attacking soldiers by name, reminding them of old comradeship. They point to you, the beautiful boy emperor, the supposed son of Caracola, and they show them the severed head of Julian USS second in command, a little trophy from an earlier skirmish, just to show they mean business. Then they throw open the gates and invite them to switch sides for a hefty bonus. It works. Julian USS men, their loyalty to Macaenus already wafer thin, hesitate. Their charge falters. Then, soldiers start to defect. It's a trickle at first, then a flood. Not as new recruits, not as conquerors, but as new recruits. Julianus is left with a dwindling, terrified handful of loyalists. He flees, but he doesn't get far. He's captured and executed, and his head is sent back to Macaenus in Antioch as a grisly warning. This is war. Now Macaenus is genuinely scared. He realizes he has a real crisis on his hands. He tries to counter your propaganda. He writes to the Senate in Rome, denouncing you, calling you the false Antonians. He tries to shore up the loyalty of his own legion, the Legio II Partica, by promising them a massive bonus and officially naming his own young son, Diadumenus, as co-emperor, trying to create a dynasty of his own. It's too late. Another legion, previously loyal to Macaenus, declares for you. Then another. The whole of Roman Syria is slipping through his fingers. He is forced to act. He gathers his remaining loyal troops, primarily the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers of the Empire, and marches out from Antioch to meet your growing army. The two forces finally clash near a small town just outside Antioch on June 8, 218. This is the moment of truth. You are 15 years old now. You have been an emperor for all of 3 weeks. You are not a soldier. You are a priest who knows more about sacred dances than battle formations. Yet, here you are, at the head of a rebel army, about to fight for control of the world. And now for our obscure little fact of the day according to the historian Cassius Dio, who was not a fan but was a contemporary. At a critical moment in the battle, your troops started to buckle. The professional, hardened soldiers of Macrinos Praetorian Guard were pushing your less organized legionaries back. Your army was on the verge of breaking. Victory was slipping away. At that moment, it wasn't a seasoned general who rallied the troops. It was your mother, Julia Ez, and your grandmother, Julia Maizay. They leapt from their chariots, ran into the thick of the wavering lines, and began pleading with the soldiers, weeping, raging, physically blocking them from retreating. They shamed them into holding their ground. And then, you played your part. Seeing what your mother and grandmother were doing, you rode to the front line yourself, sword in hand, a vision of youthful, divine fury. Whether this was your own initiative or you were shoved forward by a hunter is, of course, a matter of some debate among historians. Some paint you as a coward hiding behind the women. Others, like the historian Herodian, give you a bit more credit, describing you charging forward like a divine spirit. The reality is probably that you were a terrified teenager who, in a moment of pure adrenaline and with the example of the women in your family, did something unexpectedly brave. Your dramatic appearance combined with the frantic appeals of your mother and grandmother turned the tide. Your soldiers, inspired or perhaps just deeply embarrassed, rallied and pushed back with renewed ferocity. The battle was won. Macrinos, seeing his elite guard falter, panicked. He shaved his beard, disguised himself as a courier, and fled the battlefield. It was a pathetic end. He tried to make it to Rome but was captured in Chalcedon. Across the Bosporus from Byzantium, and executed. His young son was also caught and killed. Just like that. It's over. You won. At 15 years old, you were the undisputed master of the Roman Empire. The lie has become reality. The gamble paid off. The boy priest from Emesa is now on his way to Rome. You've won the battle, Macrinos is dead, and the Eastern armies have all sworn allegiance to you. You are, for all intents and purposes, the emperor. But there's a catch. The heart of the empire, the city of Rome itself, has only heard whispers and frantic messages about you. The senators, the aristocracy, the people of Rome, they don't know you. They only know the story the supposed son of Caracalla has defeated the usurper. For now, they are cautiously optimistic. A return of the old dynasty sounds better than the instability they've just endured. You and your entourage, your mother, your assorted Syrian courtiers, and of course your rock begin the long, slow journey from Syria to Rome. This isn't a quick trip. It's a grand imperial procession that takes the better part of a year. You spend the winter in Nicomedia in Bithynia, modern-day Turkey, setting up a temporary court. It's here that you start to give the Roman world its first real taste of what kind of emperor you're going to be. The first warning sign for the stuffy, conservative Roman Senate comes not in person, but on a piece of canvas. You decide to send a little something ahead to Rome too. You know, introduce yourself. You commission an official portrait. This is standard practice. A new emperor sends his image to be hung in the Curia, the Senate House, so the senators can literally look upon the face of their new ruler. But the painting you send is not what they are expecting. Traditionally, an emperor's portrait would show him in a dignified pose, perhaps in military armor or a simple toga, looking stern, wise, and very, very Roman. You, however, send a full-length portrait of yourself, not as a Roman emperor, but as you were in Emesa, priest of Elagabael. Imagine you are a senator. You're a man in your 60s, from a family that has served Rome for generations. You've survived plots, wars, and the whims of a dozen emperors. You gather with your colleagues in the hallowed hall where Cicero once spoke, where Augustus laid the foundations of the empire. A giant, painted panel is unveiled. And you see a teenager. A very pretty teenager. His eyes are lined with black hole, his cheeks are rouged. HES dripping with necklaces, bracelets, and gems. HES not wearing a toga or armor, but flowing, decadent silks of purple and gold. And on his head is a massive, jewel-encrusted tiara. Most shockingly, HES depicted standing next to your god, the black conical stone, in the act of performing some sort of ritual dance. The silence in the Senate House must have been deafening. This was not the image of a princeps, a first citizen of Rome. This was the image of an Eastern monarch, a priest king, a figure completely alien to Roman tradition. The historian Cassius Dio, who was a senator and likely present, described the scene. He said the senators, looking at this painting, felt they were seeing not their new emperor, but a caricature. It was a cultural shockwave delivered via oil paint. This single act sending the painting is a fascinating historical detail because it shows your complete disregard for, or perhaps misunderstanding of, Roman sensibilities right from the start. You weren't trying to assimilate or adapt. You were announcing that your world, the world of Emesa, of silk and incense and a sacred stone, was the new reality. Rome would have to adapt to you, not the other way around. This brings us to a little academic debate. Was this act one of pure youthful arrogance, or a calculated political statement? Some historians argue you were simply naive. At 15, you were proud of your role as high priest, and you genuinely thought this was the most impressive and important version of yourself to present. You wanted to show them who you really were. Others suggest it was a deliberate provocation, a power move orchestrated by your grandmother to signal that the old rules no longer applied. The new dynasty was here, it was divine, and Rome had better get used to it. The truth is probably a bit of both your genuine identity amplified by your family's political agenda. The senators are now in a bind. They can't very well refuse to display the portrait of the new emperor who controls all the armies. So they hang it. They hang this bizarre, glittering, utterly foreign painting in the Senate House, right over the altar of the goddess Victoria, the very symbol of Roman victory and tradition. Now every time they enter the chamber to conduct the business of the empire, they have to do so under your watchful, coal-lined eyes. They vote you all the traditional titles and honors, of course. They have to, but they do so with a rising sense of dread. They exchange nervous glances. The whispers start. Who is this boy? What have we gotten ourselves into? The optimism that followed your victory over Matt Ennis is evaporating fast, replaced by a deep and profound anxiety. You haven't even set foot in the city yet, and you've already managed to alienate the most powerful political body in the empire, if self-destructive opening move. And the main act, your grand entrance into Rome, is still to come. After a long winter and a slow, meandering journey across the Balkans and up through Italy, the moment finally arrives in the late summer or early autumn of 219 AD. You are about to make your grand entrance into Rome. The city has been buzzing with anticipation and anxiety for months. They've seen your portrait. They've heard the stories trickling in from the east, tales of a boy priest, of strange rituals, and of a court that looks more like a Syrian temple than a Roman headquarters. A traditional Roman triumph for grand entrance and adventures has a certain script. The emperor rides in, usually on a horse or in a stately chariot, acknowledged by the Senate and the people, and then makes his way to the Capitoline Hill to pay respect to the great god of Rome, Jupiter Optimus Maximus. It is a gesture of humility and respect for the traditions that hold the empire together. You, however, have no intention of following the script. Your procession enters the city, and it's a spectacle unlike anything Rome has ever seen. The streets are lined with people craning their necks to get a first look at their new ruler. They see the Praetorian Guard, the legionaries, the usual military pomp. But then comes the heart of the parade. You are not riding a horse. You are in a magnificent chariot, gilded and studded with gems, but you are not holding the reins. The chariot is being pulled by a team of flawless white horses, and you are walking backwards in front of it, your eyes fixed on the passenger. And the passenger is your god. The black conical stone of Eligaba El, draped in the finest fabrics, sits enthroned on the chariot seat as if it were a living being. You, the emperor of the known world, are acting as its humble attendant, its guide, its herald. You are walking backwards, facing the stone, making sure no stray branch or clumsy foot should impede its path. The reins of the horses are draped over your arms, but your focus is entirely on this inanimate object. The symbolism is earth-shattering for any Roman watching. You are not presenting yourself to the city, you are presenting your God to the city. You are not the master of Rome, you are the servant of the strange foreign deity. The message is clear: the true ruler of Rome has arrived, and it is not a man, but a rock from Syria. Your personal appearance only adds to the spectacle. You are dressed again in your priestly silks, makeup on, jewelry glinting in the Italian sun. You are a splash of vibrant, exotic color against the marble and travertine of the city. The crowds are likely stunned into silence, punctuated by gasps and confused murmurs. This isn't the stoic, masculine authority figure they expect. This is something else entirely, something alien. This brings us to our mainstream history point. Your entrance fundamentally subverted Roman religious and political norms. By placing your God physically and symbolically above yourself, and by extension above the traditional gods of Rome, you were declaring a religious revolution from your very first day in the capital. This wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a direct challenge to the entire Roman religious establishment. Now for a wonderfully weird historical detail. Some accounts, particularly from the historian Herodian, claim that to ensure you never took your eyes off the stone, you had the path of the procession strewn with gold dust. You walked backwards on a carpet of gold, a literal golden path for your God, all the way through the city. Can you imagine the sheer, jaw-dropping extravagance? It's the sort of detail that sounds like fiction, but it perfectly captures the theatrical, almost surreal nature of your reign. Whether it's literally true or an exaggeration, it paints a picture of unparalleled devotion and spectacle. Naturally, the procession does not head to the Capitoline Hill to honor Jupiter. That would be an insult to your God. Instead, you escort the stone to a temporary home on the Palatine Hill, the traditional residence of the emperors, effectively installing Elagabalus in the imperial palace itself. Jupiter, the king of the Roman pantheon for 1,000 years, has been snubbed. There's a new god in town, and he is sleeping in the emperor's spare room. And here we touch upon a subtle academic disagreement. Was this grand entrance an act of sincere, profound religious piety, or was it the ultimate act of political branding? Some scholars argue that you were a true believer. You genuinely saw yourself as the earthly vessel for your God, and your actions were driven by a faith that was absolute and unshakable. To you, honoring your God was more important than winning over a bunch of stuffy old senators. A more cynical view, however, suggests this was a calculated effort to establish a new basis for imperial power. For centuries, emperors have been deified after their death. You, by making your God the center of the state, were essentially claiming divinity, or at least a unique connection to it, while you were still alive. You weren't just an emperor, you were a holy man, a prophet. Your authority didn't come from the Senate or the army, but directly from heaven, embodied in that black stone. Whatever the motive, the effect is the same. Your first day in Rome is a declaration. You have not come to be Elagabalus' high priest in Rome. And you are going to remake the city, the empire, and its very soul in the image of your God. The Roman elite, who were already nervous, are now quietly terrified. The honeymoon period, if it ever existed, is officially over. Now that you and your God are settled in Rome, you can't very well have the supreme deity of the universe living in a spare room on the Palatine Hill. That just won't do. Elagabalus needs a proper home, a temple more magnificent than any the city has ever seen. This becomes your first, and arguably most important, imperial project. You don't choose some quiet, out-of-the-way plot of land. That would be an admission of secondary status. You select a prime piece of real estate on the northeastern slope of the Palatine Hill, a terrace overlooking the Colosseum. This isn't just a good view, it's a statement. From this vantage point, your god's temple would be visible to huge swaths of the city. You begin construction on a massive temple complex, which will be known as the Elagabalus. This is not a rush job. It's a lavish, no-expense spared undertaking. The finest marble is shipped in, gold and silver are used for decoration, and the scale of it is designed to dwarf the surrounding structures. While it's being built, You're already planning the new religious order. The Eligabalium isn't just going to be another temple in the crowded Roman religious marketplace. It's going to be the new center, the headquarters. Your plan is breathtaking in its audacity. You decree that all other gods are merely servants of Eligabaal. Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars, the entire Roman pantheon are to be demoted. They are now, essentially, middle management in Eligabaal's divine corporation. To make this subordination clear, you order the most sacred objects from other religious cults in Rome to be moved into your new temple. This is a profound act of religious syncretist, but it's a hostile takeover, not a gentle merger. Imagine the horror of the traditional Roman priests. The eternal flame of Vesta, the sacred shields of Mars and Scylla, the palladium statue of Pallas Athena said to have been rescued from Troy, which guaranteed Rome's safety. You want them all brought under one roof. Your roof, as tribute to your god. This is our key historical point for the chapter. Your attempt to centralize all Roman worship on Eligabaal was a radical religious revolution that sought to erase centuries of tradition. You weren't adding a god to the pantheon, you were trying to replace it entirely. The Romans are aghast. These sacred objects, or pignore imperi pledges of the empire, were believed to be intrinsically linked to the survival and prosperity of Rome. To move them from their ancient sanctuaries was seen as not just sacrilegious, but cosmically dangerous. You were playing with the very foundations of Roman security for the sake of a rock from Syria. And here's a fantastic, weird little detail that illustrates the depth of your obsession. According to Cassius Dio, you even considered bringing the Jewish and Samaritan religions into this forced syncretist. You wanted to understand their rites so you could incorporate them into the worship of Eligabaal. You even went so far as to have yourself circumcised. For a Roman emperor to undergo what was seen by the Romans as a bizarre and faintly ridiculous foreign mutilation was simply unheard of. It showed that you were willing to physically alter your own body to get closer to what you considered holy, completely rejecting Roman notions of bodily integrity and what was proper for a ruler. This leads to a fascinating debate among religious historians and archaeologists. What was the Eligabalium actually like? For a long time, its exact location and layout were disputed. But archaeological work on the Palatine Hill has uncovered the massive foundations of a temple terrace right where the ancient sources said it would be. We now believe we know where it stood. The debate now centers on its appearance. The sources describe it as being built in a lavish Eastern style. But what does that mean? Was it a traditional Roman temple plan filled with foreign decorations, or was its very architecture alien, with courtyards and altars designed for Syrian, not Roman, rituals? The surviving evidence is scant, forcing historians to piece together a picture from hostile literary sources and a few ambiguous foundation stones. While the Grand Temple was under construction, you were not idle. You take over the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and begin performing your daily rituals there. You, the emperor, dance and chant in your silks, offering sacrifices. The senators, imating men of Rome, are now required to attend these services. Imagine being a powerful, stern Roman general, a man who has commanded legions and conquered barbarians, now being forced to stand around in the pre-dawn chill, watching a teenager in makeup dance for a meteorite. The sheer awkwardness must have been excruciating. You are reshaping the religious landscape of Rome, brick by brick and ritual by ritual. You see it as bringing enlightenment, as elevating Rome to a new level of divine understanding. The Romans see it as a monstrous desecration. You are building a new home. Feel light of Rome, feel like strangers in their own city. The resentment is building, quiet and deep, like the foundations of your new temple. A new god needs more than just a temple, he needs a family. In your mind, Eligabaal is not just a supreme power, but a personality, a being with needs and desires. And one of those desired is to get married. This is not just a theological concept for you. You are going to stage a literal physical wedding. But who could possibly be a worthy bride for the unconnected sun god, Eligabaal? Your eyes fall upon the perfect candidate, Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and crafts. Or, as the Romans knew her, Minerva, this choice is dripping with symbolic meaning. Marrying your foreign sun god to the Roman goddess of wisdom would be the ultimate power move. It would symbolize the union of your new, vibrant Eastern religion with the old, respected traditions of Rome. It's a divine merger designed to legitimize your god and place him firmly at the top of a new, combined pantheon. But you can't just marry a concept. You need a physical representation. So you order the most ancient and sacred statue of Pallas Athena to be brought from her temple in the Roman Forum to be wed to your black stone. This statue, the Palladium, was one of the most revered objects in the entire city. Legend held that it was rescued from the burning city of Troy by Aeneas himself, and that as long as it remained safe within Rome's walls, the city could never fall. It was, in modern terms, a spiritual nuclear deterrent. The priests of Pallas Athena are horrified. The people are terrified. Moving the Palladium was considered an act of extreme sacrilege, tempting fate in the most dangerous way possible. But you are the emperor. You issue the order, and it is done. Soldiers march into the temple and carry the venerable, ancient statue out of its sanctuary. Then you stage the wedding. This is the main historical event of this chapter, the sacred marriage, or Heroes Gomos, between your god Eligaba and the Roman goddess Pallas Athena. You preside over the ceremony yourself, a lavish, public spectacle. The black stone, draped in its finest, is placed next to the ancient wooden statue of the goddess. You declare them husband and wife, and of course a wedding of this magnitude requires a dowry. You decree that all the temple treasuries in Rome should make a wedding gift to the new divine couple, effectively another massive transfer of wealth from the traditional cults into your own coffers. The Roman elite watch this unfold with a mixture of disbelief and fury. You have not only desecrated their most sacred traditions, but you've also sent them the bill. It's one thing to introduce a new god. It's another thing entirely to hijack their most beloved goddess and force her into a sham marriage with a rock. And here's our wonderfully strange, almost comical little side detail. The marriage didn't last. Apparently the divine couple was not a good match. According to Cassius Dio, you later decided that Pallas Athena, the warrior goddess, was too fierce and warlike for your son god. You dissolved the marriage. You literally had your boys, presumably, with a very awkward apology note, and began looking for a more suitable bride. Your second choice was even more audacious. You decided your god would be better matched with the Carthaginian goddess Tyrant, or as she was known in her Roman form, Caelestis, the heavenly Aphrodite, or Urania. She was a goddess of the moon, fertility, and the heavens. A sun god and a moon goddess, it made a certain cosmic sense. So you ordered her famous cult statue to be brought all the way from its ancient temple in Carthage, across the sea to Rome. Another sacred object, another tradition uprooted. You then declared this new divine marriage, presumably with another round of costly festivities and donations. This raises a fascinating question that historians and theologians still ponder. What was the theological basis for this? Were you simply making it up as you went along, driven by personal whim, or were you operating within a sophisticated Syrian theological framework that was completely lost on the Romans? Some scholars argue that in many Eastern mythologies, the chief male deity often had a consort, and you were simply trying to replicate this structure in Rome. A mother goddess was central to many ancient religions. You may have genuinely believed that providing Eligaba with a wife was a necessary and pious act to ensure cosmic balance and fertility. The problem was that you tried to do it using the sacred figures of other people's religions as your puzzle pieces. To the Romans, this wasn't sophisticated theology. It was madness. It was like a foreign leader coming to Washington, D.C., declaring his favorite pet to be the new president, and then forcing a marriage between it and the Statue of Liberty. The act was so far outside their frame of reference that they could only interpret it as insanity or a deliberate, malicious attack on everything they held dear. You, meanwhile, are immensely pleased with yourself. You have not only provided for your god, but you've also created a grand, ongoing religious soap opera for the city of Rome to watch. You are the director, producer, and star of this divine drama. The problem is, your audience is not entertained. They are growing more and more hostile with every new, bizarre episode. With your god now housed and twice married, your next project is to formalize his worship. And this means involving the most powerful and respected men in the empire, the senators. Their lives were once filled with dignified debates about law, infrastructure, and provincial administration are about to take a very strange turn. You decide they are not just going to respect your god, they are going to actively participate in his worship. This is a fundamental shift in the role of the Roman elite. While Empress had always been the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, their religious duties were largely formal and traditional. They lead established rites. You, however, are not interested in established rites. You are importing a whole new religious performance, and you expect the senators to be your supporting cast. The primary ritual, which you lead daily, involves a series of dances and chants around the black stone. These are not the stately, solemn processions the Romans are used to. This is ecstatic, vibrant, mad worship. There is music, flutes, drums, cymbals creating a hypnotic, almost frenetic rhythm. You, in your silksome makeup, lead the dance, whirling and chanting in a language most of the attendees do not understand, and the senators are required to be there. Imagine the scene. It's just before dawn. A group of the most powerful men in the world, men who command legions and govern continents, are standing around awkwardly on a cold marble floor. They are sleepy, they are resentful, and they are watching their teenage emperor, who looks more like a performer from a foreign theater troupe, spinning in circles and singing to a meteorite. This isn't just a religious service, it's a daily dose of humiliation. But just attending isn't enough. You want them to participate. You expect them to join in the chorus of praise for Enigma. And here's our core historical point: by forcing the Senate to participate in these rites, you were breaking down the traditional barrier between the political and the intensely personal sphere of ecstatic religion. You were making loyalty to you synonymous with participation in your specific alien cult. To refuse was not just a religious disagreement, it was treason. And then there are the sacrifices. Animal sacrifices were a normal part of Roman religion, but you take them to an entirely new level of extravagance. Huge numbers of fine cattle and sheep are slaughtered daily. The altars of the Enigma are perpetually slick with their offerings. Herodian, the historian, gives a vivid description of you personally wielding the sacrificial knife, then inspecting the entrails for omens, a duty traditionally reserved for specialized priests. Now for our wonderfully bizarre detail of the day. It wasn't just the rituals themselves, it was the dress code. You created a new priestly college for Enigma, and you appointed the leading men of Rome as its members. But to serve your god, they couldn't just show up in their regular togas. They were expected to wear the same Syrian-style vestments as you. It's unclear if this was the full silkened makeup treatment, but it certainly involved linen robes and other non-Roman attire. There is nothing a proud, conservative Roman nobleman would hate more than being forced to play dress-up in what he considered to be effeminate foreign clothing. This forced participation leads to an interesting debate among historians about power and resistance. How did the senators react? The ancient sources, written by senators like Cassius Dio, portray them as being universally disgusted but too frightened to protest openly. They went along with it, seething internally. This is the cowardly but compliant model. However, some modern historians wonder if there weren't more subtle forms of resistance. Did they misunderstand the dance steps? Did they mumble the chants instead of singing them with gusto? Did they roll their eyes when they thought you weren't looking? It's a form of what social scientists call weapons of the weak, small, deniable acts of non-compliance that preserve a tiny sliver of personal dignity. We'll never know for sure, as no senator was foolish enough to write down today, "I deliberately danced out of time to annoy the emperor." But it's fascinating to imagine this quiet, passive-aggressive pushback happening in the shadow of your grand temple. Your grandmother, Julia Mays A., the architect of your rise, is watching all of this with growing alarm. She wanted you to be emperor, yes, but she wanted a Roman emperor with a useful Eastern connection. What she got was an Eastern priest who happened to be the emperor of Rome, and who was actively alienating every single person he needed to stay in power. The senators, the army, the traditional priesthood, you are systematically offending all of them. You, however, are in your element. You are surrounded by the music, the colors, the sense of your childhood faith. You have brought your home to Rome. You believe you are elevating the state, boring Romans to a higher spiritual plane. You see their sullen faces and reluctant participation not as a sign of your own folly, but as proof of their spiritual backwardness. They just don't get it yet. But they will. You'll make them. And so, every morning, the bizarre spectacle continues, widening the chasm between you and the city you are supposed to rule, while your religious revolution is in full swing. There is the small matter of your personal life. You are a Roman emperor. You are expected to marry, produce an heir, and secure the dynasty. This is Roman Emperor 101st, your grandmother, Julia Maze, who is desperately trying to salvage this whole situation, knows this is a crucial step toward creating some semblance of normalcy. If you can just be seen doing one traditional thing right, it might calm the nerves of the Roman elite. So a suitable bride is found. Her name is Julia Cornelia Paula, a young woman from a distinguished and very Roman aristocratic family. She is, on paper, the perfect choice. She's well bred, respected, and her family has connections. A marriage to her would link your new foreign dynasty to the old Roman nobility. It's a classic political alliance. You agree to the match. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seems like you're willing to play the part. The wedding, which takes place in 219 AD, is a lavish affair. You bestow upon your new wife the prestigious title of Augusta, or Empress. Coins are minted with her portrait on them, looking dignified and very Roman. For the first time, you are presenting a public face that looks something like a traditional imperial couple. The Roman aristocracy probably breathes a tiny, collective sigh of relief. Maybe this is a turning point. Maybe the weird god-marrying phase is over. Maybe the boy is finally settling down, listening to his grandmother, and learning how to be a proper emperor. You are seen with your wife at public events. You perform the duties expected of a married man. It's a performance of convention, a brief dip into the shallow end of Roman tradition. This is our mainstream historical point for this section. Your first marriage to Julia Cornelia Paula was a calculated attempt by your family, particularly your grandmother, to ground your reign in Roman tradition and appease the anxious senatorial class. It was a political move designed to normalize your image, but the performance doesn't last long. You find the role and husband to be boring. It's restrictive. It doesn't fit. Julia Cornelia Paula is a symbol of the very world you are trying to subvert, the world of stoic duty, public decorum, and tradition. You are a creature of ecstatic religion, of vibrant color, of fluid identity. Being a normal husband is like trying to fit a peacock into a pigeonhole. And so, just a year later, in 220 AD, you abruptly end the marriage. You divorce Julia Cornelia Paula. You strip her of the title of Augusta and send her away, back into private life. The official reason you give is a testament to your own strange worldview. According to Cassius Dio, you claim to have discovered a blemish on her body, which made her unworthy of being your wife. Let's pause on that excuse. It's such a weirdly specific and personal reason. This is our obscure little detail for the night. Was it true? Almost certainly not. It was likely a pretext, a way to justify a decision you had already made for other reasons. But the fact that you chose that excuse is revealing. It shows a preoccupation with physical perfection and purity, but on your own bizarre terms. It also treated the Empress of Rome not as a political partner, but as a flawed object to be inspected and discarded. For the Roman elite, who valued dignity and public face above all, this was a shocking and insulting way to dismiss a noble woman. The divorce sends another shockwave through the city. The brief hope for normalcy is shattered. It's now clear that you are not going to be contained by tradition. You are not going to follow the script. Your whims, whatever they may be, will always take precedence over political necessity or social convention. This abrupt divorce and the strange reason given for its spark a debate among historians. Why did you really do it? The simplest explanation is personal incompatibility and boredom, as mentioned. You just didn't want to be married to her. A more complex theory suggests it was a deliberate political act. Perhaps the alliance with the old aristocracy had served its purpose. Or maybe it was failing to give you the legitimacy you craved. You were symbolically casting off the old Roman nobility itself, reasserting your own unique and untethered authority. A third view connects it to your religious plans. A conventional Roman wife didn't fit into the new theological world you were building. You needed a consort who was as extraordinary as you were, and you already had someone in mind. Your grandmother, Maise, must have been tearing her hair out. Her carefully constructed bridge to the Roman establishment had just been dynamited by her own grandson. The plan to make you a palatable emperor was failing spectacularly. You had tried on the costume of a traditional Roman emperor, found it didn't suit you, and thrown it on the floor. And the next costume you were about to pick out was going to be infinitely more scandalous. The brief interlude of teaming was over. Unfiltered chaos of your reign was about to begin. Having discarded your perfectly respectable Roman wife like a boring tunic, you are now free to pursue a union that makes sense to you, one that aligns with your spiritual and personal identity. And your choice of a second bride will be an act of such profound sacrilege that it will make all your previous scandals look like minor social faux pas. You decide to marry a Vestal virgin. Let's be absolutely clear about what this means. The Vestales were the priestesses of Vesta, the Roman goddess of the hearth and home. There were only 6 of them at any given time, chosen in childhood from noble families. Their primary duty was to tend the sacred flame in the temple of Vesta, a flame that was believed to be eternally linked to the life of Rome itself. If it went out, Rome would fall. To perform this sacred duty, the Vestales took a vow of chastity that lasted for their entire 30-year term of service. This vow was the single most sacred oath in Roman society. The punishment for a Vestal who broke it was terrifyingly severe. She was to be buried alive in a small underground chamber with a crust of bread and a lamp. Her supposed lover would be publicly flogged to death in the forum. The integrity of the Vesta matter of religious piety. It was a cornerstate's spiritual security. For an emperor, the Pontifex Maximus and chief guardian of Roman religion. To violate this taboo was unthinkable. It was a spiritual atom bomb. And that is exactly what you do. You set your sights on a Vestal virgin named Aquilia Severa. You announce your intention to marry her. Your justification for this act is, from your perspective, perfectly logical and even pious. You declare that it is only fitting for you, a high priest, to marry a priestess. You frame it as a holy union, a marriage that will produce godlike children. You are blending your priestly bloodline with hers, creating a new divinely sanctioned dynasty. This is our key historical point. Your marriage to the Vestal Virgin Aquilia Severa in 220 AD was arguably your single most transgressive act against Roman religious law. It was a direct and deliberate desecration of one of Rome's most sacred institutions. The city is thrown into an uproar. Even for a populace that is becoming numb to your eccentricities, this is a step too far. It's one thing to import your own god, it's another thing to defile theirs. The Senate is powerless to stop you. The priesthood is horrified. Your grandmother is almost certainly apoplectic. This isn't just bad politics, it's spiritual treason. And now for our bizarre detail, the quote attributed to you by Cassius Dio that perfectly captures your mindset. When criticized for this sacrilegious marriage, you reportedly wrote to the Senate, "You should pardon me for what I have done, for I have acted as any man would, being captured by a violent passion." You essentially used the "I was so in love, I couldn't help it" defense for an act of state-sponsored sacrilege. This justification is so breathtakingly audacious, so completely tone-deaf to the gravity of the situation, that it's almost comical. You framed an act of profound religious violation as a simple matter of the heart, as if you were just a regular boy meets girl story, except the girl was sworn to a goddess under penalty of being buried alive. This act has led to intense debate among historians. What was your real motive? Was it truly a crime of passion? As you claimed, were you genuinely infatuated with Aquilia Severa? Some historians are willing to entertain this possibility. You were a teenager driven by impulse, and perhaps you saw her, a figure of ultimate unattainability, as the ultimate taboo would be the ultimate expression of your power. A more political interpretation suggests this was a calculated move to further subordinate Roman religion to your own. By taking a Vestal for yourself, you were symbolically taking possession of the very heart of Roman piety. You weren't just marrying a woman, you were asserting your dominance, over the goddess Vesta herself. Elagabal's priest was claiming Vesta's priestess. It was another step in your religious revolution, demonstrating that no Roman tradition was safe from being absorbed or violated by your new order. And what about Aquilia Severa herself? The historical sources, written by men hostile to you, paint her as a victim, a terrified young woman forced into this marriage against her will. But a few revisionist historians have posed a challenging question: is it possible she was a willing participant, or at least that she saw it as her only path to survival? Being chosen by the emperor, even in a sacrilegious union, was perhaps a better fate than defying him. So she remains a silent figure at the center of this immense scandal, her true feelings lost to history. So the wedding happens. You, the Syrian boy priest, emperor of Rome, take the consecrated bride of the goddess Vesta as your own. The sacred flame in the temple flickers on, but the spiritual heart of the city feels like it has been extinguished. You believe you have sanctified your reign with a holy matrimony, but in the eyes of Rome, you have committed an unforgivable sin. You have crossed a line from which there is no coming back. Your marriage to a Vestal virgin was a political and religious earthquake, but your personal life remained as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The union with Aquilia Severa, which you had justified with such pious, gut-child-producing rhetoric, did not last. Before long you divorced her too. The whiplash for the Roman public must have been intense. First, the sacrilege of marrying her, then the insult of dismissing her. It demonstrated that even your most profound spiritual justifications were subject to your fleeting whims. You then embarked on a series of marriages that were so rapid and seemingly random that historians have trouble keeping them in order. Your marital history becomes a confusing, almost comical blur. After divorcing the Vestal, you married Annia Faustina. This was, on the surface, a surprisingly shrewd political move. Annia Faustina was a descendant of the great Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Marrying her was another attempt to connect your shaky regime to a respected, legitimate dynasty. It was as if your political advisors, probably your long-suffering grandmother, managed to get you to focus on good strategy for a few minutes. You married Annia Faustina, but to do so, you first had to have her current husband, a respectable senator, executed on false charges. So even your most sensible marriage began with an act of brutal tyranny. This union, too, was short-lived, for reasons that are completely lost to history. You divorced Annia Faustina by the end of the year and did something truly mind-boggling. You remarried the Vestal Virgin, Aquilia Severa. Let that sink in. You broke the ultimate taboo to marry her, then divorced her, married someone else after killing her husband, then divorced her, and went back to the original Vestal Virgin you'd already defiled and cast aside. It's the kind of chaotic romantic life you'd expect from a badly written drama, not the Emperor of Rome. This revolving door of empresses made a mockery of the institution of imperial marriage, turning it into a public spectacle of your own indecisiveness and caprice. This flurry of marriages is our historical focal point for this section. It highlights the complete breakdown of traditional imperial decorum and the elevation of your personal, erratic desires over any semblance of political stability or strategy. Now for our obscure and frankly sad little detail. Throughout this period, you also took a husband. Or rather, a man you treated as your husband. He was a charioteer from Smyrna, a muscular, blond athlete named Heracles. Heracles was originally a slave, but he had captured your affection. You were so infatuated with him that you referred to him as your husband, delighted in being called his wife, his mistress, his queen. According to Cassius Dio, you would say, "Call me Lord, for I am a lady." This relationship was not hidden. It was a public and prominent feature of your court. You even, reportedly, promised Heracles the title of Caesar, which enraged the soldiers and the political class. This brings us to a complex and highly debated aspect of your life. How should we interpret this? For centuries, hostile ancient historians used this as proof of your perversion and depravity. You were painted as a moral monster, and your relationships with men like Heracles were Exhibit A. Modern historians, however, approach this with much more nuance. One perspective is to view your relationships through the lens of Roman sexual norms. For a Roman man of high status, the gender of his sexual partner was less important than the role he played. It was acceptable for the elite Roman male to be the active or dominant partner with social inferiors of any gender, slaves, prostitutes, etc. What was deeply scandalous and unmanly about your relationship with Heracles was that you publicly and gleefully took on the passive or submissive role. You, the emperor, the dominus lord of the world, wanted to be called domina lady by a former slave. You were subverting the very core of Roman masculinity, which was inextricably linked to power and dominance. Another, more recent, interpretation views your actions through the lens of gender identity. Some scholars argue that your behavior went beyond sexual preference and into the realm of gender expression. Your desire to be called lady, your adoption of female dress and mannerisms, these could be interpreted as expressions of a genuine female identity. You weren't just a man who loved other men, you may have seen yourself as a woman. This interpretation is, of course, highly speculative. We are projecting modern concepts of gender identity onto a figure from 1800 years ago, about whom we only have biased and hostile sources. It is impossible to know for sure what was going on in your head. Was this a form of gender nonconformity, a personal identity, or simply, as your enemies claimed, a form of decadent madness? The academic world is still deeply divided on this. What is certain is that your chaotic and convention-defying personal life had disastrous political consequences. The soldiers who were the foundation of your power were deeply conservative. They had followed you because you were supposedly the son of Caracolla, a warrior emperor. They now saw you marrying undivorcing women at random, and most disturbingly for them, publicly acting as the wife of a charioteer. It eroded their respect for you, not just as a person, but as their commander-in-chief. Your grandmother saw this. She saw the foundation of her grand project cracking under the weight of your scandals. And she knew she had to do something before it all came crashing down. While your public life is a whirlwind of religious revolution and marital chaos, your private world is becoming increasingly focused on a different kind of transformation. You begin to spend more and more time in your chambers, not with senators or generals, but with cosmetics, perfumes, and wigs. Your fascination with female presentation, which was already evident in your priestly garb, now becomes a central obsession. You are the emperor. You are the emperor. You have access to the most luxurious goods from across the known world. Silks from the Far East, unguents from Egypt, pigments and dyes from every province. You use them all. The ancient sources, particularly Cassius Dio and the author of the Historia Augusta, paint a vivid picture. They describe you plucking your body hair, a practice common among some Roman women but seen as deeply unmanly for an emperor. They say you spent hours before a mirror, applying white laid powder to your skin to make it paler, and rouge to your cheeks. You would carefully paint your eyes, extending the lines in the Eastern style you were used to. This isn't just about looking pretty. It's about crafting a different persona. You experiment with wigs, preferring elaborate female hairstyles over the short, practical cut of a Roman man. You abandon the toga, the symbol of Roman citizenship and masculinity, whenever possible, in favor of your beloved flowing silk robes. You are, piece by piece, deconstructing the visual identity of a Roman emperor and replacing it with something entirely new, something fluid and feminine. This deep dive into female aesthetics is our main point for this chapter. It wasn't just a quirk, it was a fundamental rejection of the Roman masculine ideal that was embodied by the emperor. The emperor was supposed to be a soldier, a father figure, the pater patria. You were actively choosing to present as a soft, perfumed, and beautiful demeanor. And here's a specific, strange detail that captures the extent of this. It's said that you would sometimes appear in public gatherings wearing a hairnet, a distinctly female accessory, and with your breasts exposed or enhanced in the manner of Venus. You would even address your lover, the charioteer Heracles, with flirtatious, high-pitched baby talk in public, much to the horror of everyone present. You weren't just dressing as a woman in private, you were performing femininity in your official capacity as ruler. This behavior has been a subject of endless fascination and debate for historians. The traditional view, for almost 2 millennia, was simple: this was evidence of your insanity and moral corruption. The Roman historians who wrote about you saw a direct line connecting your effeminate appearance to your disastrous rule. For them, A man who looked like a woman could not possibly rule like a man. It was a failure of character that manifested as a failure of governance. Modern interpretations are, naturally, more complex. One school of thought sees this as a continuation of your religious identity. In many ancient Eastern cults, including some in Syria and Anatolia, priests would adopt female dress and mannerisms to better serve a mother goddess or to achieve a state of spiritual transcendence that went beyond mortal gender roles. The Gali, the self-castrated priests of the goddess Cybele, are a famous example. While you were a priest of a male sun god, the cultural milieu you came from was far more accepting of gender fluidity in a religious context than Rome was. Perhaps you saw your transformation not as becoming a Roman woman, but as becoming a more perfect holy vessel, shedding your earthly masculinity to get closer to the divine. Another interpretation, as we touched on before, views this through the modern lens of transgender identity. These historians argue that we should take your actions at face value. You were expressing a deeply felt female identity. Your repeated requests to be called lady or empress, your adoption of female dress and mannerisms, these are all consistent with the experience of a trans woman. This perspective seeks to reclaim you from history's judgment, reframing you not as a mad emperor but as a figure of gender nonconformity, struggling for self-expression in a rigid and unforgiving society. Of course, this view is controversial. Many historians caution against applying modern identity categories anachronistic ally. They argue that we lack the evidence to diagnose your psychological state and that we risk misinterpreting your actions by removing them from their 3rd century Roman context. The debate over whether you were transgender or simply a radical religious performer is one of the liveliest discussions surrounding your reign. Regardless of the why, the what was politically catastrophic. Your appearance just confirmed every fear the Romans had about you. They saw your makeup and silks and saw a weak, decadent, foreign ruler who was fundamentally un-Roman. It made you seem unpredictable and, worse, ridiculous. Power in Rome was tied to gravitas, to a sense of sober, masculine authority. By rejecting the very basis of your right to rule, you might have seen a goddess, an empress, your true self. But the reflection your subjects saw was a political disaster. Your transformation is not just a matter of dress and cosmetics. It begins to permeate the very language of power in the imperial court. You start to insist on being addressed in ways that fundamentally challenge Roman and Latin conventions of gender and authority. The most famous and startling example, as recorded by Cassius Dio, is your preference for the title Domina Lady or Mistress over Dominus Lord or Master. For a Roman, this is not just a grammatical switch. Dominus was a loaded term. While it meant master, many earlier, good emperors had rejected it as being too monarchical, preferring the more republican title Princeps First Citizen. You not only embraced the autocratic Dominus, but you feminized it. This was a double shot. You were claiming absolute power, but demanding it be recognized in a female form. Imagine a stern, bearded senator, trained his whole life in rhetoric and law, having to approach the throne and address the supreme ruler of his world as my lady. The mental gymnastics and the sheer humiliation involved would have been immense. It's a performative act of submission that goes beyond mere political loyalty. It forces the speaker to participate in your redefinition of identity. This insistence on female titles is our core historical point for this chapter. It represents a deliberate subversion of the language of power and a direct challenge to the patriarchal foundations of Roman political life. This wasn't a one-off request. It was part of a broader pattern of behavior. You reportedly designated a room in the imperial palace as a women's senate, or sena calum mulierum. Here, your mother, Julie Soaemias, would preside over meetings with other high-ranking women of the court. What did they discuss? This brings us to a wonderfully catty and likely exaggerated detail from the Historia Augusta. It claims this women's senate would issue decrees on matters of etiquette, which noble lady had the right to wear which type of jewels, whose chariot should be pulled by mules versus donkeys, who had to yield precedence to whom at court. Is this true? Almost certainly not in the way it's presented. The idea of a formal, parallel senate for women issuing binding decrees on fashion is probably a satirical invention designed to make your reign seem even more frivolous and absurd. However, like most good satire, it likely has a kernel of truth. Your mother and grandmother were immensely powerful figures. They did hold their own kind of court and undoubtedly wielded enormous influence behind the scenes. What the hostile historians did was to take this reality, the unprecedented power of the imperial women, and caricature it as a group of ladies sitting around gossiping and making silly rules. It was a way to delegitimize their real political influence by framing it as trivial and feminine. The academic debate here is fascinating. What was the real nature of this women's senate? One theory is that it was simply the name given to the regular gatherings of the imperial women and their allies, a sort of informal advisory council for your mother and grandmother. A more provocative theory suggests you were genuinely trying to create a formal institution to recognize the power that women held in your court. In your Syrian upbringing, powerful priestesses and matriarchs were a familiar concept. Perhaps you saw no reason why women shouldn't have their own formal assembly to manage the spheres of influence they controlled. Was it a forward-thinking, proto-feminist experiment in governance, or just a gossipy clique that was later satirized by your enemies? The truth is impossible to recover, buried under layers of hostile propaganda. Beyond titles and senates, you also began to sign official documents with a new, feminized imperial name. While you had taken the name Marcus Aurelius Antonius, you sometimes styled yourself, or were styled by your inner circle, in ways that played with gender. You would refer to yourself as the wife of Heracles and the queen of the Romans. This public performance of a female sovereign identity was, for the Romans, the ultimate proof that the world had been turned upside down. The emperor, the embodiment of Roman martial and patriarchal virtue, was now calling himself lady. This wasn't just eccentric, it was a cosmic disruption. In the Roman mind, order in the state was a reflection of order in the cosmos and in the family. A strong, male head of household was a microcosm of a strong male emperor leading the state. By abdicating your masculine role, you were, in their view, inviting chaos into the empire itself. You, on the other hand, likely saw it very differently. You were creating a court that reflected your reality. You were surrounded by powerful women, your mother and grandmother, and you yourself identified with the feminine. Why shouldn't the language and institutions of power reflect that you weren't disrupting order, you were creating a new one that was more authentic to you? But your authentic self was fundamentally incompatible with Rome's idea of an emperor. Every time a senator was forced to say domina, the resentment grew, and the political ground beneath your jewel-encrusted slippers became a little more unstable. Your behavior within the palace walls was shocking enough to the elite, but rumors began to circulate of even more scandalous activities taking place under the cover of darkness. These stories, gleefully recorded by your detractors, paint a picture of an emperor who not only adopted female persona but also actively engaged in what the Romans considered the most degrading of female professions. According to the historian Cassius Dio, who, it must be remembered, despised you and was writing to slander your memory, you would haunt the city's taverns and brothels at night. But you weren't there as a customer. You would reportedly set up a room for yourself, complete with a curtained bed, and stand at the door, just as prostitutes did. You would use a soft, melting voice to solicit passers-by, charming them with your beauty and promising them a good time. This is the central, scandalous claim of this chapter, the accusation that the Emperor of Rome was moonlighting as a prostitute. You would, the story goes, compete with the other women in the brothel, boasting about how many customers you had and how much money you had earned. You would even argue with your husband, the charioteer Heracles, accusing him of not being a sufficiently attentive pimp. Let's be clear, this story is almost certainly a fabrication. It's a piece of vicious, character-assassinating propaganda. The logistics alone make it nearly impossible. The emperor could not simply wander off at night into the rough-and-tumble world of Roman brothels without being recognized or mobbed. It's a caricature, an invention designed to portray you in the most debased and contemptible light imaginable. It takes your adoption of a female identity and pushes it to its most extreme and, for a Roman male, most humiliating conclusion. However, the story is still historically significant. And this leads to our obscure detail. The Historia Augusta adds another layer to this tale. It claims you didn't just work out of existing brothels, you set up official ones within the imperial palace itself, forcing your high-ranking courtiers, attendants, and even dinner guests to patronize them. This version is even more absurd but serves the same purpose to paint your court as a cesspool of degradation where all normal hierarchies were inverted. So if the stories aren't literally true, why are they important? This is where the historical debate begins. The key question is not did this happen, but why was this story told and what does it tell us? The traditional interpretation is that this was the ultimate slander. In Roman society, to be a prostitute was to be in an fam, is a person without legal standing, a non-person. To accuse an emperor of this was to strip him of all dignity and legitimacy. It was the rhetorical equivalent of a nuclear bomb. The story was created and spread after your death to justify your murder and ensure your memory was forever stained. A more nuanced modern interpretation looks at the story as a reflection of Roman anxieties. Your behavior was so far outside the norm that your enemies had to reach for the most extreme metaphors to describe it. By publicly taking a passive sexual role with hero class and adopting female dress, you were, in their eyes, prostituting the imperial office itself. You were selling its dignity for the cheap price of personal gratification. Isn't a factual account but a political allegory. You turned the palace into a brothel, and the emperor into a harlot. It's a powerful and vicious metaphor for what they saw as your misrule. A third perspective, from scholars of gender and sexuality, looks at what the story might be distorting. Perhaps you did create spaces within the palace that were dedicated to pleasure and sensuality, spaces that operated outside the rigid social norms of the Roman elite. These might have been places of music, dance, and intimacy that were shocking to conservative sensibilities. The hostile historians then took the existence of these hedonistic spaces and twisted them, through the lens of their own prejudice, into the most scandalous thing they could imagine: a brothel run by the emperor. What we can say for sure is that your behavior generated stories of a kind no other emperor had faced. No one accused the stern Augustus or the warrior Trajan of such things. These rumors were tailored to you, playing on your known gender non-conformity and your reputation for sexual scandal. They stuck because they seemed to fit the bizarre public persona you had already cultivated. You, meanwhile, are likely oblivious to the most extreme of these rumors, living in the rarefied air of the Palatine Hill. You are focused on your own world, your god, your lovers, your self-expression. You see yourself as a divine being, a priestess empress. You might even see your sexuality as a sacred act, a form of ecstatic communion. But outside the palace walls, the stories are taking on a life of their own. They are morphing you from an eccentric ruler into a monstrous figure of depravity, a caricature of everything a Roman emperor should not be. The gap between your self-perception and your public reputation has become an unbridgeable chasm. Your quest for self-transformation, which has already reshaped your wardrobe, your court, and your public persona, now reportedly turns to your own body. The ancient sources, with a tone of horrified fascination, claim that you began to seek a physical alteration that was, for their time, the stuff of pure fantasy. You wanted to become a woman. According to Cassius Dio, you issued a kind of imperial edict or public call to the physicians of the empire. You offered vast sums of money and high honors to any surgeon who could successfully perform a reassignment surgery. Specifically, you were looking for someone who could construct female genitalia for you. Dio quotes you as saying you had a desire to have the pud of a woman, using the specific Latin term for female anatomy. This is, without a doubt, one of the most astonishing claims made about any Roman emperor, and it forms the core of this chapter. The report that a Roman ruler actively sought what we would now call gender-affirming surgery is a moment that feels almost anachronistic, ally modern. A flash of a 21st century concept in a 3rd century world. Of course, the medical science of the 3rd century was nowhere near capable of performing such a procedure. It was a medical impossibility. The request itself would have been seen by Roman physicians as a sign of profound madness. They were skilled at treating wounds, setting bones, and prescribing herbal remedies, but the idea of surgically reshaping a person's fundamental anatomy in this way was pure science fiction. This leads us to our bizarre unspecific detail of the chapter, the Historia. Augusta claims that you had already chosen a man, one of your lovers named Eutychus, to be your husband in the most official sense after the planned surgery. The text describes your relationship with Theotokos, an athlete from Smyrna, in lurid detail, emphasizing how you plan to formally unlegally become his wife once your body matched your desires. This adds another layer to the story, suggesting it wasn't just a physical whim but part of a plan to fully and socially transition into a female role. So how do historians handle this extraordinary claim? The debate is intense and falls into several camps. The traditionalist skeptical view argues that the story is like the brothel rumor, a complete fabrication. It's the logical endpoint of all the other slanders. If the emperor dresses like a woman, acts like a woman, and wants to be called a woman, the ultimate way to mock him is to claim it's a satirical exaggeration designed to paint you as the most unnatural being imaginable, someone who not only defied social norms but defied nature itself. These historians would point out that Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta are relentlessly hostile sources, and this story is the jewel in the crown of their character assassination. A second perspective takes the claim more seriously, not as a literal account, but as a distorted reflection of something that did happen. Perhaps you did consult physicians about your body. Maybe you were interested in castration. The Galli, the priests of Cybele, were self-castrated, and you were deeply interested in ecstatic Eastern religions. Perhaps you saw castration as a path to spiritual purity, or as a way to align your body with your non-masculine identity. This was a known, if extreme, practice in the ancient world. The hostile historians could have then taken this request for castration and, to make it sound even more bizarre and perverted to a Roman audience, twisted it into a fantastical desire for a surgically constructed vagina. The third, and most provocative, interpretation is championed by some scholars in gender studies. They argue, what if we believe the sources? What if, knowing it was impossible, you still expressed this desire? This view frames you as a figure of profound gender dysphoria, someone whose internal sense of self was so strongly female that you were willing to articulate a desire for a body that matched, even if the technology to achieve it didn't exist. Trapped not only by an unforgiving society but also by the limitations of premodern medicine. You weren't mad in the sense of being irrational. You were expressing a deep-seated need that the world around you could only interpret as madness. This is the most empathetic reading, but it is also the most speculative, relying on taking the words of your worst enemies and reading them for psychological truth. We will never know for certain. The question of the emperor's surgery remains one of history's great enigmas. It is at the intersection of propaganda, psychology, and the history of medicine. Was it a lie, a distortion, a genuine, heartbreaking request? Whatever the truth, the circulation of such a story, even as a rumor, would have been devastating. To the Romans, and especially to the hyper-masculine world of the military, the idea of their emperor wanting to be physically mutilated and transformed into a woman would have been the ultimate sign of weakness and insanity. It would have confirmed that you were not just a bad emperor, but an aberration of nature. The story, true or not, became part of the narrative that was rapidly sealing your fate. Beyond the grand dramas of religion and identity, your daily life in the palace was a spectacle of bizarre luxury and juvenile cruelty. Your imperial banquets became legendary, not for their sophisticated conversation, but for their sheer, surreal extravagance and their penchant for mean-spirited practical jokes. A traditional Roman banquet for the elite was an occasion for networking, political discussion, and showcasing one's wealth and taste. Your banquets were something else entirely. They were theatrical productions where the guests were often unwilling participants in your strange games. This is our central theme for the chapter: your use of imperial power to create environments of absurd and sometimes dangerous excess. The food itself was a testament to your obsession with the exotic and the absurdly expensive. You reportedly served dishes made from the brains of 600 ostriches, or plates piled high with the tongues of peacocks and nightingales. You would disdain common foods like beef or pork, insisting on serving your guests the rarest fish and fowl, shipped at enormous expense from the furthest corners of the empire. You once, allegedly, ordered your servants to collect 10,000 pounds of cobwebs to demonstrate the greatness of Rome and your ability to command pointless, large-scale tasks. But the food was just the beginning. The real hallmark of your parties was the prank. You seemed to take a perverse delight in unsettling your guests, A famous example from the Historia Augusta which, again, is prone to exaggeration but captures the spirit of your reputation is your wax food. Guests would be presented with beautifully crafted, realistic-looking dishes, succulent roasts, delicate pastries, vibrant fruits, only to find they were made entirely of wax or wood or ivory. While they chewed on their inedible meals, you would be dining on the real thing, laughing at their confusion and frustration. It was a power play, a way of reminding everyone who was in control. You could afford to literally play with your food and theirs. Here's another more specific and cruel example that serves as our obscure detail. You would sometimes invite a group of the city's fattest men to a banquet, seating them together on air cushions. Partway through the meal, your servants would, on your signal, deflate the cushions, sending the large men tumbling to the floor in a heap, unable to easily get back up, all for your amusement. You also had a fondness for unleashing tame leopards and lions into the dining room after the guests were drunk and sleepy. The animals were supposedly harmless, but the sheer terror of waking up to a large cat sniffing your face was the whole point of the joke. The academic debate surrounding these stories is, as always, about separating fact from fiction. Did you really serve ostrich brains and unleash leopards on your dinner guests? Many historians view these tales as stop-bad tyrant tropes. The weird food accusation was a common way to criticize an emperor for being decadent and out of touch. The cruel prank trope was used against other emperors like Caligula and Nero to show their descent into madness and sadism. It's possible that your enemies simply took this pre-existing template for a bad emperor and applied it to you, embellishing it with details that fit your personality. However, other historians argue that where there's this much smoke, there's probably some fire. Your entire reign was characterized by a love of spectacle and a disregard for convention. It's not a huge leap to believe that this translated into your parties. You might not have done all of these things, but the stories like you reflect the general atmosphere of your court, unpredictable, theatrical, and centered entirely on your amusement. Your pranks, if they happened, weren't just random acts of cruelty. They were a microcosm of your rule. You were constantly toying with the Roman elite, keeping them off balance, reminding them of their powerlessness in the face of your absolute and whimsical authority. The senator who found his dinner was made of wax was experiencing the same thing as the senator who was forced to dance for your god or world, where the rules were arbitrary and the emperor's whim was the only law. These events also reveal a profound immaturity. You were still a teenager after all. A teenager with unlimited power and unlimited money. It's a dangerous combination. Your pranks are those of a very rich, very powerful, and very bored adolescent who has no one to say no to him. You treated the empire as your personal playground and its most powerful men as your toys. While you might have found these evenings hilarious, the laughter was not shared. Every guest who left your palace after being made a fool of or genuinely terrified carried that resentment with them. You weren't building loyalty or respect with these displays. You were cultivating fear and contempt. The stories of your banquets spread through the city, adding to the growing narrative of an emperor who was not just strange, but also cruel, frivolous, and dangerously unstable. Your flair for the dramatic and your love of overwhelming spectacle sometimes had unintended and deadly consequences. The most famous example of this is the story of the flower petal bath, a tale that perfectly encapsulates how your pursuit of decadent beauty could spiral into something far more sinister. The setting is another one of your lavish banquets. The guests are reclining, the wine is flowing, and you decide it's time for the evening's grand finale. You want to create an unforgettable moment of sensory overload, to literally shower your guests in luxury. You give a signal, and from a hidden mechanism in the ceiling, a shower begins. But it's not water. It's flowers and roses. The most prized and fragrant flowers begin to rain down into the dining hall. At first it must have been magical. A gentle, fragrant cascade of color. The guests would have been delighted, marveling at the sheer, poetic extravagance. But the shower doesn't stop. The gentle cascade becomes a deluge. The petals keep falling, piling up on the floor, on the couches, on the guests themselves. The air becomes thick and cloying with the perfume. What was beautiful becomes overwhelming. What was a gentle shower becomes an avalanche. This is the core historical narrative of this section, the tale of the flower petal suffocation. According to the story, the petals piled up so high and so fast that some of the guests, likely drunk and slow to react, were unable to push their way out. They were buried. They suffocated to death under a mountain of soft, beautiful rose petals. This incident, famously depicted in a 19th century painting by Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema called The Roses of Heliogabalus Ellis, has become one of the defining images of your reign. It's the ultimate symbol of decadent cruelty, of beauty turned lethal. But did it actually happen? This is where we dive into our academic debate. The story comes from the Historia Augusta, a source that is notoriously unreliable and filled with sensationalism. Most modern historians are extremely skeptical that this event occurred as described. They point out the practical difficulties. The sheer volume of petals required to suffocate multiple people would be astronomical. The logistics of releasing them in such a way would be incredibly complex. It sounds more like a dark fairy tale than a historical event. So if it probably didn't happen, why is the story so persistent and powerful? Historians suggest it's a moral allegory, a cautionary tale about your reign. The flower petals represent your style of rule, initially attractive, exotic, and beautiful like your youthful charm and the appeal of a new dynasty, but ultimately excessive, suffocating, and deadly. You were smothering Rome with your foreign ways, your endless rituals, and your personal whims, just as the petals smothered your guests. The story is a literary invention, but it's a brilliant one, perfectly capturing the essence of how your enemies perceived your impact on Rome. It's a metaphor for how your gifts were actually punishments. And here we find our peculiar little detail, which comes from looking at the context of Roman engineering. The Romans were masters of stagecraft. They had sophisticated machinery in their theatres, amphitheatres, trapdoors, elevators, peg mortar, and mechanisms for showering audiences with saffron-scented water or little prize tokens. It is possible that the imperial palace was equipped with a similar mechanism for releasing petals, so while the deadly outcome is almost certainly fiction, the initial act, showering a banquet hall with an extravagant amount of flowers, is well within the realm of possibility for a spectacle-loving emperor with a Roman engineer's toolkit at his disposal. The killer flowers part is the propaganda. The flower shower part might just be history. The story, true or not, contributed to the image of you as someone for whom human life was cheap and subordinate to your aesthetic whims. Whether you were unleashing leopards or burying people in roses, the narrative was the same. You were a monster who derived pleasure from the suffering and terror of others, all while wrapped in a veneer of beauty and luxury. It also highlights the isolation of your power. In your mind, you were probably just creating a beautiful moment, the most incredible party trick ever. You wanted to give your guests an experience of overwhelming beauty. The idea that this could be dangerous or deadly might not have even crossed your mind. You were living in a reality so detached from that of normal people, so insulated by wealth and absolute authority, that the basic consequences of your actions became invisible to you. You were the director of a grand play, and if some of the actors got hurt, well, that was just part of the spectacle. This perceived callousness, this gap between your intent and its lethal, or perceived lethal potential, was another nail in your coffin. Your unconventional approach to ruling wasn't confined to religion and parties, it extended to the very nuts and bolts of Roman administration. One of the most critical duties of an emperor was to appoint qualified men to positions of power: provincial governors, financial administrators, military commanders. The stability of the empire depended on having competent people in these jobs. Your method for selecting them, however, seemed to be based on criteria that were, to the Roman elite, completely insane. The traditional path to high office in Rome involved a long, steady climb up the cursus honorum, a ladder of military and political posts. It was based on experience, family connections, and political skill. You threw this entire system into chaos. You began appointing people to the most powerful positions in the government based not on their resume, but on your personal whims and, according to the hostile sources, on shockingly inappropriate physical criteria. This is our main historical point. Your appointments to high office ignored merit and tradition, instead favoring personal favorites, cronies from your Syrian entourage, and individuals who appealed to you for scandalous reasons. This practice corrupted the administrative machinery of the empire and created widespread resentment. The most infamous claim, made by both Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta, is that you appointed men to keep posts based on the size of their genitalia. This is, on the face of it, one of the most ludicrous accusations in Roman history. The story goes that you would gather candidates, have them stripped, and then hand out governorships and prefectures based on a purely physical inspection. It's an allegation so bizarre that it takes seriously, and yet, this is our weirdly specific detail for the chapter. The Historia Augusta even names names. It claims a man was appointed prefect of the city guard based on this criterion. It insists that your entire circle of friends and appointees were chosen for their large endowments. Is this literally true? Almost certainly not. Like the brothel story, it's a piece of extreme satirical slander. It's a way of saying your decision-making was based on the lowest, most debased, and irrational criteria imaginable. It's a metaphor for a government run on principles of pure lust and caprice, rather than reason and experience. The accusation is designed to be rhetorically devastating, portraying your administration as a government of pimps and perverts. So what's the historical reality that this slander is likely distorting? This is where the academic debate lies. While you probably weren't lining men up for physical inspections, you were appointing unqualified people. You elevated your lover, the charioteer Heracles, to a position of immense informal power, even promising him the title of Caesar. You gave another favorite, a dancer named Gordius, a key position as prefect of the Vigiles, the city's police and fire brigade. You filled the palace and key administrative roles with friends and allies from your hometown of Emesa. From your perspective, this might have made sense. You were surrounding yourself with people you knew and trusted, people who were loyal to you personally, not to some abstract idea of Rome. These were your people. From the Roman perspective, it was a disaster. Experienced senators and equestrians were being passed over for dancers, charioteers, and Syrian courtiers who knew nothing of Roman law or military procedure. It was an administration run by amateurs and cronies. This created a government that was, at best, incompetent and, at worst, deeply corrupt. Your favorites, now in positions of immense power, used their influence to enrich themselves. They sold offices, took bribes, and dispensed justice to the highest bidder. The Historia Augusta claims that everything was for sale in your court: citizenship, political office, even judicial verdicts. While this is likely an exaggeration, it points to a court Ruth your reign saw a breakdown in administrative integrity. This cronyism also had a dangerous effect on the military. You appointed a man named Carmazion, a former actor and a key supporter from your initial rebellion, as the Praetorian prefect, the commander of the emperor's personal guard, and one of the most powerful positions in the empire. You even had him made consul, the highest office in the Roman Republic's sold hierarchy. The professional soldiers of the Praetorian Guard were now taking orders from a man they considered a low-life entertainer, a crony who had gotten the job through favoritism. This bred deep and dangerous resentment within the very military unit that was supposed to protect you. So while the story of you choosing officials based on their physical attributes is likely a vicious caricature, it's a caricature of a real and damaging problem. You were dismantling the meritocratic and aristocratic structures of Roman governance and replacing them with a system based on personal loyalty and favoritism. You were not just the emperor, you were the head of a clique, and by alienating the entire class of experienced administrators and commanders, you were making powerful enemies every single day. The men who knew how to run the empire were now sitting on the sidelines, watching in horror as your unqualified favorites made a mess of things, and they were waiting for their chance to set things right. The person watching your disastrous reign with the most acute sense of horror was the one who had engineered it in the first place, your grandmother, Julia may say. She was a shrewd, ambitious, and deeply pragmatic political operator. She had put you on the throne not because she believed in your divine mission, but because she wanted to restore her family's power. She had envisioned a puppet emperor, a handsome and pliable figurehead she could control from behind the scenes. Instead, she had unleashed a whirlwind. You were completely uncontrollable. Your religious obsessions, your personal scandals, And your catastrophic administrative appointments were not just embarrassing, they were threatening to bring the entire Severan dynasty crashing down. The loyalty of the army, which she had so carefully purchased with her family's gold, was wearing dangerously thin. The Senate hated you. The people of Rome were disgusted by you. Maze realized that you were no longer an asset, you were a liability of epic proportions. So, with the cold calculation that was her trademark, she began to work on a plan B. If the Emperor was a lost cause, the only solution was to find a new one. This is the crucial turning point in our main historical theme. For this chapter, Julie Maze's strategic pivot away from you and toward your younger cousin, a move designed to save the dynasty from your self-destruction. Her chosen instrument was your cousin, a boy named Josiah Spasianus Alexianus, who would become known to history as Severus Alexander. He was the son of your aunt, Julia Mama Ea, Maze's other daughter. Alexander was, in every way, your polar opposite. He was about 4 years younger than you, a quiet, serious, and mild-mannered boy. While you were dancing in silks and causing scandals, Alexander was being given a traditional Roman education. He was taught Latin and Greek rhetoric, law, and military history. His mother, Julia Mamaea, who was just as ambitious as your own mother but far more careful, was deliberately molding him into the image of a perfect, respectable young Roman aristocrat. Maze saw in Alexander the Emperor you were supposed to be dignified, manageable, and appealing to Roman sensibilities. She began to subtly shift the family's political machinery to support him. She started talking to you, using all her powers of persuasion. She likely framed it not as a replacement, but as a way to help you. The argument probably went something like this: my dearest grandson, being emperor is so stressful. Your divine duties as high priest take up so much of your time. You need someone to handle the tedious, day-to-day business of the state, the military parades, the boring meetings with senators. Why not adopt your dear cousin Alexander Jr. title of Caesar? He can be your heir and your helper. This will please the soldiers and the senators, and it will free you up to focus on what's truly important, the worship of Galaga. This is our specific, behind-the-scenes detail, the pressure campaign from Maze and your Aunt Mamaea. It was a masterpiece of political maneuvering. They weren't staging a coup, they were presenting you with a solution that appealed to your own vanity and your disdain for the mundane tasks of rule. They were asking you to delegate the parts of the job you clearly hated anyway. The historical debate here centers on your state of mind. Did you see through this plan? Did you realize you were being sidelined, or were you so absorbed in your own world that you genuinely thought it was a good idea? Some historians believe you were politically naive enough to fall for it. You were tired of the grumbling generals and the disapproving senators. The idea of handing off those responsibilities to your little cousin, so you could spend more time with your god and your lovers, might have seemed genuinely attractive. Another view is that you weren't given a choice. By this point, in late 221 AD, your political capital was gone. Maze likely came to you with an offer you couldn't refuse, backed by the implicit threat that the military's loyalty was no longer guaranteed to you alone. She might have made it clear that a co-ruler was the price of keeping your throne and your life. The army wanted a respectable figurehead, and if you wouldn't be one, you had to provide one. Whatever the reason, you agreed. In a public ceremony, you formally adopted your cousin Alexander. You bestowed upon him the name Marcus Aurelius Severus Alexander and the title of Caesar. You presented him to the Senate and to the Praetorian Guard as your chosen son and heir. In that moment, you sealed your own fate. Your grandmother's B plan was now officially in motion. You had, with your own hands, elevated your replacement. You thought you were getting a subordinate and an assistant. But Maze and Mamaea had just placed a ticking time bomb at the heart of your court. All the hopes of the disenchanted Romans, the soldiers, the senators, the common people now had a new focus. They had an alternative. They had a good emperor in waiting to contrast with the bad emperor on the throne. The stage was set for a final, deadly confrontation between you and the quiet, unassuming boy you had just named as your son. You've adopted your cousin Alexander, and for a short while, a tense and artificial peace settles over the palace. You are the senior emperor, the Augustus, with your god and your rituals. He is the junior emperor, the Caesar, a symbol of future stability. It doesn't take long for you to realize that you've made a terrible mistake. Alexander is everything you are not, and the people of Rome love him for it. When you appear in public, you are an object of fear and ridicule, dressed in your extravagant silks. When Alexander appears, dressed in a simple, dignified Roman toga, he is met with cheers. He is praised for his modesty, his good manners, and his traditional Roman virtues. The soldiers of the Praetorian Guard, who despise your favorites like Heracles and Carmazion, see in Alexander a future commander they can respect. Every cheer for Alexander is a dagger in your ear. He was supposed to be your subordinate, your shadow. Instead, he is stealing your spotlight. The affection that the soldiers and senators show him is affection that they are pointedly denying you. You see the way they look at him, with hope and respect. Then you see the way they look at you. Your jealousy quickly coalesces into paranoia and outright hatred. You realize that your grandmother hasn't given you a helper, she's given you a rival. And you decide to get rid of him. This is the core of this chapter, your first clumsy and ultimately failed attempt to eliminate your popular young cousin, which exposes your weakness and further turns the army against you. Your first move is to try and strip him of his authority and popularity. You forbid senators from visiting him. You try to curb his public appearances. When this fails to dim his rising star, you decide on a more direct approach. You put out a rumor that the young Caesar is gravely ill, on the verge of death. You do this to test the waters, to see how the army will react to the idea of a world without Alexander. The reaction is not what you hoped for. The Praetorian Guard doesn't just mourn, they become suspicious and angry. They refuse to believe the news unless they see proof. They suspect foul play, your foul play. They confine themselves to their barracks, refusing to perform their duties, and demand that you bring Alexander to their camp to prove he is still alive. This is a direct challenge to your authority. The guard is no longer obeying you, they are making demands. Panicked, you have no choice but to comply. This leads to a truly pathetic and humiliating scene, or specific detail for this section. You are forced to ride in a grand imperial litter to the Praetorian camp. And you have to take Alexander with you. Imagine the picture, you, the flamboyant Augustus, sitting next to the quiet, sober Caesar, being chauffeured to the barracks to prove to your own soldiers that you haven't murdered your adopted son. It's an admission of complete powerlessness. When you arrive, the soldiers erupt in cheers for Alexander. They hoist him onto their shoulders, acclaiming him as their favorite. They barely acknowledge you. They then escort you both back to the palace, their message loud and clear: Alexander is under their protection. This public humiliation pushes you over the edge. You are furious. You identify the soldiers who were the ringleaders of this little demonstration of loyalty to Alexander. You also blame the senators who have been cultivating a relationship with him. You decide to make an example of them. You order the arrest and execution of several prominent senators and soldiers, known to be in Alexander's camp. This is where the historical debate lies. Was this a calculated act of terror designed to reassert your authority, or was it a purely emotional, paranoid lashing out? Some historians see it as a desperate, if foolish, attempt at a political purge. You were trying to eliminate the core of the opposition and intimidate the rest into submission. It's the classic move of a tyrant who feels his power slipping. Others see it as the impulsive tantrum of a teenager who has been publicly upstaged. You were humiliated, unwanted revenge, without thinking through the strategic consequences. The likely truth is that it was a volatile mix of both a political goal fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. The plan backfires spectacularly. Instead of intimidating the opposition, it galvanizes them. The execution of respected senators and soldiers confirms every earnest's worst fears about you. You are not just eccentric, you are a bloody tyrant. You have violated the unspoken rule that an emperor does not turn on his own elite without very good cause. Your grandmother, Maise, and your aunt Mama Ie see the writing on the wall. They know you will try again, and they know that next time you might succeed in killing Alexander. They ramp up his personal security, surrounding him with guards loyal only to them. The palace is now divided into two armed camps. The brief, tense peace is over. A deadly game of cat and mouse has begun. Right in the heart of the imperial family. And you have just shown your hand and lost the first round. The failed attempt to sideline Alexander and the subsequent executions have left you isolated and exposed. The Praetorian Guard now views you with open hostility, acting as the personal bodyguards for your rival cousin. Your grandmother and aunt are actively working against you, shielding Alexander and plotting their next move. The atmosphere in the palace is thick with poison and paranoia. You are an emperor trapped in your own home, surrounded by enemies you created. But you are not one to learn from your mistakes. Your jealousy and hatred for Alexander have only intensified. The fact that he is now untouchable, protected by the very soldiers who should be loyal to you, is an unbearable insult. You cannot stand to see him, to hear him praised, to know that he represents everything the Roman world wants and you do not. Your mind becomes fixed on a single, obsessive goal. You have to get rid of him, permanently this time, and you have to break the Praetorians' loyalty to him, so you concoct another plan, one that is even more reckless than the first. The date is March 11th, 222 AD. You issue an order to the Senate. You command them to strip Alexander of his title of Caesar. You are, by imperial decree, disowning your adopted son and declaring him a private citizen once more. At the same time, you prepare to arrest him. You believe that you can formally and legally demote him. The soldiers will be forced to abandon him. It is a desperate gamble, based on a complete misreading of the political situation. This final, fatal move is our core historical point. Your decision to formally strip Alexander of his titles was the final provocation that triggered the Praetorian Guard to mutiny and overthrow you. But soon as the news of your order leaks from the Senate House, it reaches the Praetorian camp. The soldiers are enraged. This is a direct attack on their chosen one, the boy they have sworn to protect. It's a violation of the deal they thought they had brokered. They see it as the prelude to Alexander's murder. They don't hesitate. The guard mutinies. They pour out of their camp on the edge of the city and march on the Palatine Hill, their swords drawn, their voices roaring Alexander's name. They are not coming for a negotiation, they are coming for you. Word of the advancing soldiers reaches you in the palace. Absolute panic ensues. Your small cadre of loyal retainers and Syrian courtiers is no match for thousands of angry, heavily armed professional soldiers. Your mother, Julia Soamias, who has stood by you through everything, realizes the game is up. This is our specific, poignant detail for the chapter, the final moments of mother and son. Soamias grabs you, her teenage son, the emperor of the world, and pulls you toward a hiding place. Where do you hide? The sources say you ran to a large chest or a box. But the most pathetic and enduring image comes from the historian Herodian. He says you and your mother fled to a latrine, a toilet, and tried to hide in the small private room. It is a detail so squalid, so undignified it has the ring of truth. The boy priest who walked on gold dust, the emperor who dined on ostrich brains, the self-proclaimed living god, is now cowering in a toilet with his mom. The academic debate here is less about what happened and more about why the soldiers finally snapped. Was it purely their affection for the good Prince Alexander? This is the traditional narrative, a simple story of good versus evil. However, many historians see more pragmatic motives at play. The Praetorians weren't just acting out of love for Alexander, they were acting out of self-preservation and professional pride. You had insulted them, promoted your unqualified cronies like Colmazy on over their own commanders, and threatened the stability that guaranteed their bonuses and high status. Your chaotic rule was bad for business. Alexander, backed by the shrewd Mazi and Mama EA, represented a return to predictable, stable governance where their position would be secure and respected. They weren't just saving a boy prince, they were protecting their own interests. Their loyalty had a price, and you had long since stopped paying it. Your grandmother, Julia Mamaye, are almost certainly the architects behind this final act. They likely received word of your plan to strip Alexander of his title and gave a prearranged signal to their contacts within the guard. They didn't just wait for the mutiny to happen, they instigated it. They had seen that you were beyond saving, and the only way to preserve the dynasty was to excise you like a tumor. It was a brutal but necessary act of political survival. Back in the latrine, the sound of heavy, hobnailed sandals and angry shouts gets closer. The flimsy door is kicked in. The soldiers are there, their faces grim, their swords raised. There is no more room for dancing. No more time for pranks. No more time for pranks. No more chance for escape. The 4-year-long fever dream of your reign is about to come to a brutal, ignominious end. The soldiers burst into the small, foul-smelling room. The light from their torches glints off their helmets and the blades of their swords. You are cornered, a terrified 17-year-old, huddled with your mother. There is no imperial majesty left, no divine aura, just fear. Your mother, Julia Sami, in a final, desperate act of maternal instinct, throws her arms around you, trying to shield you with her own body. She pleads with the soldiers, begs them to spare her son, the Emperor. But it's far too late for that. The Praetorians are not there to negotiate. They have been insulted, their authority challenged, and their chosen successor threatened. They are a blunt instrument of vengeance, and their minds are made up. They drag your mother away from you. She clings to you, screaming, until she is pulled aside and struck down. They kill her first, right in front of your eyes. The woman who had been your constant companion, your co-conspirator, the one who willingly sacrificed her own reputation to put you on the throne, dies on the cold stone floor of a palace toilet. Then they turn to you. You are alone now, facing the fury you have so carelessly cultivated for 4 years. You are stabbed again and again. It is a swift, brutal, and ugly end. This is the grim, central event of this chapter, the joint assassination of you and your mother at the hands of the Praetorian Guard. Your reign, which began with a lie in a military camp in Syria, ends with a bloody reality in a latrine in Rome. You are dead. The Emperor is dead. But the soldiers' rage is not yet spent. They are not content just to have killed you. They need to desecrate you, to erase the stain of your rule through a process of public humiliation. They drag your body and your mother's body out of the palace. They haul you through the streets of Rome, the same streets you once entered in a grand procession, walking backwards before your God. Now you are being dragged face down through the filth and the mud. The people of Rome pour out to watch this gruesome spectacle. There is no mourning. There are no tears for the fallen emperor. Instead, there are cheers and jeers. They throw stones and refuse at your lifeless body. It's a spontaneous, citywide explosion of pent-up hatred. All the resentment from the forced rituals, the scandalous marriages, the corrupt officials, the sheer weirdness of it all, is now unleashed upon your court. This leads to our strange and macabre detail of the day, the attempt to dispose of your body. The soldiers first try to stuff your corpse into a sewer. The opening of the Roman sewers, the Cloaca Maxima, was large, but apparently your body, or perhaps the two bodies together, wouldn't fit. The image is grotesque, a group of soldiers trying unfailing to shove their murdered emperor down a drain. It's a final, pathetic indignity. Thwarted by the sewer system, they drag your body down to the Tiber River. They tie weights to it to ensure it will sink and never be recovered. A proper burial was incredibly important to the Romans. It was essential for the peace of the soul in the afterlife. By denying you a tomb and throwing you in the river like common garbage, they were delivering a final curse, condemning you in both this world and the next. Your mother's body is also disposed of, though with less ceremony, her fate tied to yours even in death. This raises a stark historical debate. Was this extreme post-mortem desecration a spontaneous act of mob fury, or was it a calculated political act, orchestrated by the new regime? The traditional view paints it as a primal scream of a city liberated from a tyrant. The people and the soldiers, in a moment of collective catharsis, enacted their own rough justice on your remains. However, a more cynical and politically astute interpretation suggests that this was all carefully managed. Your grandmother, Julia Mamae, now in full control with the new Emperor Alexander on the throne, needed to distance the dynasty from you as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. What better way to do that than to allow, and perhaps even encourage, the public's desecration of your body by letting the mob have its way? They were channeling the public's anger and making you the sole scapegoat for all the problems of the last 4 years. The message was clear: the monster is dead. The real, respectable Sever and Dynasty is now in charge. We are nothing like him. It was a brutal but effective piece of political theatre. As your body sinks into the muddy waters of the Tiber, the sun sets on the most bizarre chapter in Roman imperial history. The boy priest from Emesa is gone. The 4-year-long party is over. Now, the cleanup can begin. With your body at the bottom of the Tiber and your mother's discarded, the formal process of erasing you from history begins. This is not left to chance or mob sentiment. It is an official, systematic act of state-sanctioned forgetting. The Roman Senate, the same body you once forced to watch you dance, is now convened by the new regime. Your grandmother Maze A and Aunt Mama Ye, acting on behalf of the new 13-year-old Emperor, Severus Alexander. The Senate, overjoyed to be rid of you, immediately passes a decree of damnatio memoriae. This is our central historical concept for the chapter. Damnatio memoriae translates to condemnation of memory. It was an official decree that aimed to erase a person, usually a disgraced emperor, from the public record as if they had never existed. It was the ultimate punishment, worse than death. The process is methodical and thorough. Your name, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, which you had adopted to link yourself to the great emperors of the past, is now formally prescribed. Any inscription on any public building, monument, or milestone across the entire empire that bears your name must be chiseled out. Stonemasons are sent to arches, temples, and administrative buildings with hammers and chisels. They painstakingly chip away at the letters of your name, leaving a conspicuous, rectangular scar in the stone, a very visible sign of a very deliberate erasure. These scars can still be seen on Roman ruins today, silent witnesses to a fallen tyrant. Your face is next. Every statue, every bust, every sculpted relief of you is to be destroyed. Heads are knocked off statues, faces are smashed with hammers. The beautiful, androgynous features you had so carefully cultivated are systematically obliterated. Coins bearing your image are recalled and melted down. Your grand portrait, the one that so horrified the senators when it was first hung in the Curia, is taken down and burned. This brings us to a specific and fascinating detail: the survival of your image. Despite the thoroughness of the damnatio memoriae, it wasn't completely successful. The empire was simply too large, and your image too widespread for every single likeness to be found and destroyed. A few busts, hidden away or overlooked in distant provinces, survived. More importantly, thousands of your coins remain. It was impossible to recall every last denarius from every corner of the empire. It is thanks to these surviving coins that we have a clear idea of what you actually looked like. They provide a physical record that defied the official sentence of oblivion. The academic debate surrounding damnatio memoriae is about its true purpose and effectiveness. Was the goal really to make people forget? Of chiseling out a meme or smashing a statue is a very public and violent performance. The skull left on a monument doesn't create a seamless illusion that no one was ever there. Instead, it draws attention to the absence. It creates a ghost and loudly proclaims, "He was someone so terrible, we are not even allowed to speak his name." Some historians argue that damnatio memoriae was not about forgetting, but about controlling memory. It was a powerful to love political propaganda for the new regime. By officially declaring you a non-person, they were legitimizing their own rule, which was founded on your murder. Every chiseled stone was a reenactment of their victory over you, a constant reminder to the public of who was now in charge and what happened to those who displeased them. It was a lesson. As part of this official forgetting, your religious revolution is dismantled overnight. Your sacred black stone, the god Elagabael, is unceremoniously evicted from its grand temple on the Palatine Hill. It is stripped of its imperial honors and shipped back to its original home in Emesa, Syria. It goes from being the supreme god of the universe back to being a local Syrian deity. The Elagabaelium is rededicted, some sources say, to Jupiter, others that it was simply abandoned for a time. All the sacred objects you had stolen from other temples are returned. The old gods are restored to their proper places. The sacred marriage is annulled. The city's religious life is hastily reset to what it was before you arrived. Your name, however, lives on in one respect. You are no longer officially called Marcus Aurelius Antonius. History will remember you by a name that is both a reminder of your god and an insult to Elagabalus. It's a Latinized, slightly corrupted version of the name of the god you worshipped, forever linking you to the foreign cult that the Romans so despised. You are named after your own obsession, branded by it for eternity. With you and your memory officially erased, the Roman world settles into the reign of your cousin, the young Severus Alexander. Under the careful management of his mother, Julia Momma, the ever-present Julia Maze, his rule is the complete antithesis of yours. It is a period of deliberate, almost performative moderation. The government immediately signals a return to tradition. This is our main historical point for this chapter. The reign of Severus Alexander was constructed as a direct and conscious rejection of everything you stood for. It was a restoration project, designed to heal the wounds you had inflicted on the Roman system. Alexander, being only 13, is a figurehead. The real power lies with a council of regency dominated by Momma and Maze, and supported by a hand-picked body of 16 respected senators. This is a dramatic change from your autocratic style. Where you ruled by personal whim, they rule by committee. Where you ignored the Senate, they embrace it. They embrace it. The historian Herodian remarks that the state had returned to an aristocracy rather than a monarchy. It was a calculated move to win back the support of the elite you had so thoroughly alienated. All of your controversial appointments are, of course, reversed. The dancer, the charioteer, and your other favorites are dismissed, and in some cases, executed or exiled. They are replaced by experienced senators and equestrians, men who had been sidelined during your reign. The cursus honorum is restored. Competence, not cronyism, is once again the stated criterion for advancement. The moral and social tone of the court changes overnight. The silk robes and makeup are gone, replaced by the simple toga and military cloaks. The wild parties cease. The palace becomes a place of sober administration, not decadent spectacle. Alexander is portrayed as a model of Roman virtue. He is modest, respectful to his elders, especially his mother, and dedicated to his studies. He is the perfect anti-Elagabalus. This brings us to a specific and interesting detail that highlights this new direction. One of the first acts of the new regime was to pass laws specifically targeting luxury and what they deemed effeminate behavior. Some PTU laws which regulated extravagant dress and dining were revived. These were almost certainly a direct reaction to your excesses. They were, in essence, Elagabalus laws designed to prevent anyone from ever behaving like you again. It's a fascinating example of how your personal style had a direct, if negative, impact on Roman legislation. The historical debate here revolves around the nature of Alexander's reign. Was it truly a golden age of restored senatorial power and good governance, as the sources friendly to him and hostile to you claim, or was this carefully managed image just propaganda, a different kind of performance? Many modern historians lean towards the latter. They argue that while the style of rule changed, the substance of power did not. The Severan dynasty remained a military monarchy, propped up by the army. The women of the court, Momma and Maze, held the real power, a situation that was just as un-Roman in its own way as your rule had been. The respect shown to the Senate was often superficial. The senators were given the illusion of power, but the final decisions were still made in the palace, now by two formidable women instead of a teenage boy. Furthermore, the regime's constant need to define itself against you reveals a certain insecurity. They couldn't just rule, they had to constantly remind everyone that they were not you. Your ghost loomed over Alexander's entire reign. Every policy decision was, in part, a commentary on your failures. This ghost of Elagabalus was a useful political tool. Anytime there was trouble, they could point back to the chaos of yore for years and remind people how much worse things could be. You became the benchmark for bad emperorship, a convenient boogeyman to make the current rulers look good by comparison. Meanwhile, your god, the Black Stone of Emesa, is back in Syria. Its brief, glorious moment as the master of the universe over. It returns to being a regional deity, its cult fading from the wider imperial consciousness. Your attempt to remake the heavens has failed utterly. Jupiter's back on his throne. The old order has been restored. The message sent by the new regime is one of stability, tradition, and a return to Roman values. The 4-year interlude of surreal, glitter-fueled, gender-bending chaos is officially over. Rome has woken up from its fever dream, and the new rulers are working very hard to convince everyone that it will never, ever happen again. They are building their new, sensible, grey world on the ruins of your vibrant, chaotic, and colourful one. So after all the chaos, the glitter, the scandals, and the blood, what is your legacy for nearly 2,000 years? The answer was simple and brutal. You were a monster, a degenerate, a tyrant. The historical verdict, written by your enemies and cemented by centuries of tradition, was unanimous. You were the worst emperor Rome ever had. The primary sources that shaped this image are the ones we've visited throughout our story. The Senator Cassius Dio, who lived through your reign, gives us a detailed, eyewitness account, but one that is dripping with personal contempt and aristocratic disgust. The historian Herodian, writing a generation later, provides a more detached but still highly critical narrative. And then there's the Historia Augusta, a late Roman collection of imperial biographies that is a treasure trove of scandalous, sensational, and often completely fabricated stories. It's this last source that gives us the killer flowers in the government by genitalia. Together, they form a powerful chorus of condemnation. This is our mainstream historical point for the final chapter. Your traditional image as the epitome of Roman imperial degeneracy is a direct result of the universally hostile ancient sources that survived. For centuries, there was no other version of the story to tell. Edward Gibbon, in his monumental The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, famously called you a monster and dismissed your reign as a tale of infamy and folly. However, in the modern era, a more nuanced and complex picture has begun to emerge. Historians have started to look at you not just as a caricature of vice, but as a historical phenomenon to be understood. This has led to a fascinating ongoing reassessment of your reign. This is where we find our final academic debate, which is really a debate about your entire life. Were you really a tyrant, a religious fanatic, a social revolutionary, a transgender icon? Let's look at the different interpretations. The misguided religious reform review argues that your primary motivation was sincere, if fanatical piety. You weren't trying to destroy Rome, you were trying to save it by bringing it what you genuinely believed was the one true God. Your tragedy was a massive cultural misunderstanding. You tried to impose your Syrian religious worldview on a Roman society that was utterly unprepared for and hostile to it. You are less a monster and more a failed prophet, a man out of time and place. Then there is the political incompetent view. This perspective, favored by many political and military historians, sets aside the scandals and focuses on your failures as a ruler. You failed to manage the Senate, you failed to secure the loyalty of the army, you alienated the elite, and you had no grasp of Roman political tradition. Your downfall wasn't due to your religion or your gender identity, but to your simple, catastrophic failure at the basic job of being a Roman emperor. You were a teenager who was handed the most powerful job in the world and had absolutely no idea what to do with it. A more recent and influential interpretation frames you as a figure of otherness and cultural conflict. This view emphasizes your identity as a Syrian, an outsider from the East. Your reign represents a clash of civilizations within the Roman Empire itself. You brought your Eastern religion, and your Eastern concepts of monarchy and divinity to a city that defined itself by its Italian and Greco-Roman heritage. The Romans' reaction to you, the horror, the ridicule, the slander was a reaction against this foreigners. The accusations of effeminacy and perversion were classic ways that the Roman elite stereotyped and demeaned people from the East. In this light, your story becomes a case study in cultural prejudice and the violent rejection of the other. And finally, as we've discussed, there is the interpretation of you as a pioneer of gender nonconformity. Scholars in queer theory and gender studies have reclaimed you as a historical figure who defied the rigid gender binaries of your time. They focus on your adoption of female dress, your desire to be called Domina, and your reported wish for surgery. They see you not as a failed emperor, but as a person who dared to live an authentic, gender-fluid life in the face of immense social pressure. This view challenges the very foundations of the traditional historical judgment, asking us to see what was condemned as madness as a courageous act of self-expression. So, who were you? The truth is, you were likely a complex and volatile cocktail of all these things. A sincere religious zealot, a politically inept ruler, a Syrian outsider clashing with Roman norms, and a teenager exploring a profound and unconventional gender identity. You were not a simple monster. You were a catalyst, a historical agent whose brief, chaotic reign exposed the fault lines of the Roman Empire, the tension between East and West, the fragility of imperial authority, and the rigid boundaries of Roman identity. The ultimate irony is that the damnatio memoriae, the attempt to erase you completely, failed spectacularly. By trying to forget you, they made you unforget you, they made you unforgettable. You remain one of the most notorious and endlessly fascinating figures in Roman history, a testament to a time when a teenage priest from Syria tried to make the whole world worship his god, a black stone that had fallen from the sky. And so, our journey through that 4-year fever dream comes to an end. The story fades, like the cheering and the jeering in the streets of Rome. The dust settles. The loud, vibrant colors of your court, the silks, the gems, the coal, the gold dust all dissolve into the quiet, murky depths of the Tiber. Feel the chaos recede, the frantic energy soften into a distant, muffled hum. The shouts of the legionaries, the chants of the priests, the music of the flutes and drums, it all melts away, leaving only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Imagine yourself now, floating in a calm, quiet space. The weight of history, with its arguments and its tragedies, lifts from your shoulders. You are no longer in Rome, no longer a spectator to that ancient drama. You are simply here, in the stillness of your own room, in the comfort of your own bed. The echoes of the past are now just whispers, lulling you gently towards sleep. You can feel the gentle pull of slumber, a warm and welcoming current, much kinder than the cold waters of any ancient river. Let the last thoughts of emperors and empires drift away like clouds passing across a silent moon. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to judge. There is only peace and the soft, quiet darkness that waits to cradle you. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are ready to drift into your own dreams, far, far away from the noise of the past. The end of the article. Good night.